Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk about the Articles of Confederation and why it was important that they got rid of it and established the Constitution instead. But before I do that, I want to give you a nice little glimpse of my dog Hendo. Can you see Hendo? Hi Hendo. Okay, so hopefully he stays quiet through the video. Okay, so right before the Declaration of Independence was written, so this was still during the Revolutionary War, the colonists met in what was called the Second Continental Congress, and they decided they needed a government that would help the colonies make decisions. So they created something that came to be known as the Articles of Confederation. So it's a form of a government. In this, there was no executive branch, so they didn't want a king like King George III, so they created no executive branch. They left the judicial branch or the court systems up to the state government, so they didn't have a judicial branch, but they did have a legislative branch, so only one branch of government. Unicameral is the fancy term for that, which you might see on the test. But not much got done because each state had a single vote and it required at least 9 states voting in favor to actually pass anything. So there wasn't a lot of things that got passed. And any amendment to the articles or change to the government required all 13 states to agree unanimously. And as you can imagine, it's hard to get 13 states, much less 13 people, to agree to something unanimously. Not to mention, small states like Rhode Island, who only had 68,000 people, had the same amount of votes as the large states like Virginia, who had about 10 times as many people. So there were some issues in discrepancy in who was getting the representation in the Articles of Confederation. So even though they did have a Congress, it was weak. And this is the key part of the Articles of Confederation. If you're asked a question about it, you're most likely going to be asked, like, what was a weakness of it, and then what was one strength, and then maybe comparing it with the Constitution. But the weakness was intentional because the founding fathers wanted the states to have more power. And this comes from their feelings during the Revolution, right? And their response to what the king was doing and what Parliament was doing. There were a few things that really limited what the government could do under the Articles of Confederation. So essentially, here are some of those weaknesses you could discuss. Congress could not enforce its taxes. They could ask the states nicely, like, please give us some tax money. But it was voluntary. And as you can imagine, not many people are volunteering to give up their money, and the states would not do the same. We're not basically doing the same, not willing to give up their money. It had no power to regulate trade, meaning each state could have a different tariff rate or laws relating to trade. So that became confusing, and it's not really unified throughout the country. Another key one is that they couldn't even raise an army to enforce things or even to defend themselves against attack. As a specific example, you can address as to why the articles were weak. In Massachusetts in 1786, there is something called Shays' Rebellion, and this is led by Daniel Shays. He leads a group of farmers in a rebellion. Many of them had fought in the Revolutionary War, and now they owed money due to these high taxes. They wanted the state to begin giving out paper money, which would help make taxes a little easier to pay and stop their property from being taken. They grabbed their guns and tried to force their demands. Because the federal government didn't have an army to stop this rebellion, the wealthy class in Massachusetts had to pay for their own small army to stop them. So essentially, the wealthy people had to hire people to come in to stop this rebellion because the government couldn't do it themselves. But this really scared the wealthy class, and with the idea that the lower classes would rise up in large groups the next time they disagreed with the law. So this encouraged people that a stronger central government was needed. This is a really good comparison with the Whiskey Rebellion, which is proving that the Constitution is strong, which we will talk about at a later date. Remember, whiskey is strong, so if you can remember that, that proves the Constitution is strong, whereas Shays' Rebellion proves the Articles of Confederation was weak. Other problems the Articles of Confederation had were Great Britain was dumping cheap products in the American economy, which was hurting American businesses. Spain didn't allow Americans to access the Mississippi River, so this was stopping them from trading more, which was also hurting businesses. States were creating their own laws, stopping trade between other states. That would be like if we weren't allowed to buy things in Nevada, or we had to pay an extra tax just to buy something from there, or from Arizona, or from any other state, which could become really confusing if trade wasn't regulated by the national government like that. And another big complaint was that there was no Bill of Rights, so people's individual freedoms were not being protected. But the Articles of Confederation did do some things well. In 1785, they passed the Land Ordinance, which sold land in the Old Northwest Territory. You can see it on the map here. It required that the land was surveyed, broken into towns that were 6 miles square, and divided into 36 sections each. But it also required that each town had to set aside part of the money for education, and this really helped public education develop in these new territories. So that's a good positive thing that you could discuss. They also passed something called the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, and this dealt with how the land would be governed in this new territory. People who moved here didn't want this to turn into a situation where they lost their political rights and were basically a colony to the United States, just like they were a colony under Great Britain. So the ordinance said that at first they were directly under the authority of the federal government, but as soon as 60,000 people lived in their territory, they would become a state, which would give them voting rights in Congress. It also banned slavery in this territory for the new states, which was a big first step at the time. So a couple examples of positive things that you could discuss: the Land Ordinance and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, and discussing the banning of slavery or the setting aside of land and money for public education. Okay, our practice question today is another short answer question. This one is from the 2017 exam, and it is going to have you compare, well, first talk about the Articles of Confederation, which represents an accomplishment, a argument that critics had against it, and then also comparing with the Constitution. So go ahead and try this one out yourself, answer it, or jot down some notes about how you would answer it, and then check the answers in the description. Hope you guys have a great day.